and I'm going to start here. I'm going to start with budgeting. Okay. I tell you all the time, and it's the first part of the financial action plan, that budgeting is paramount, and that you should do a unique monthly budget every single month where you have your income at the top and then all of your expenses, and it should be zero based, meaning every single dollar that you bring in should have a name and it should be allocated in some way, shape, or form. Now, why has the pandemic shown us that budgeting is important and that we should budget? Well, we saw that a lot of people lost their jobs, right? We saw that a lot of people didn't have any way to make income because they were self-employed and their businesses got shut down and they were forced to not work, right? And if you are forced into not working, right, and you are overspending based on your income, then it's going to be very, very difficult to stay afloat for any amount of time. Even if you're working a little bit, right? If your income gets cut and you don't have any margin in your budget, you don't have any room in your budget in order to make some adjustments and be able to live on a little bit less income, then it's going to be very, very difficult. If you're living on, a paycheck to paycheck basis and every single dollar that you're bringing in is being spent out, then that is problematic. If you don't have any margin in your budget, that is going to be problematic. So the coronavirus pandemic shows us that budgeting is important and that we need to know where our income is coming from and we need to know what our expenses are. And even more than that, we need to cut out unnecessary expenses and cut out unnecessary spending, because when something negative happens, right, and something unforeseen happens and we have all of these unnecessary expenses that we continue to pay on, these unnecessary expenses can take away the margin in our budget, and it can really decrease the amount of money that we have to live on, and it can force us into negative situations where we have to go into debt or we have to borrow money from someone or something, right, where we're indebted to someone else. And that's the last thing that we want, is to be indebted to someone, because, as I've said a million times on this show, if you are in debt, debt is going to be a strain on your cash flow. Right? Debt is only going to take money from you, right? It's not going to provide you any money. It is going to take money away from you, right? That's the nature of debt. You borrow money and that money has to be repaid with interest. So they are taking money away from you in interest if you're having to borrow money. And if you don't properly budget, if you don't have the proper, expenses and the proper margin in your budget, and then you can't work as much, or you have to take a job working less or something along those lines, then you are going to be, in a bad situation. And a lot of people were, and a lot of people may still be since the coronavirus pandemic has come through. Okay. Now, right along those same lines, what did the coronavirus pandemic teach us? It taught us that emergencies happen, right? This may have created an emergency in the lives of many. Okay. And what do I tell you guys within the financial action plan? We need to have an emergency fund. We need to have money that if something happens that is an emergency, that is unforeseen, that, we didn't have any way to plan for, right? We didn't have any way to plan for it, and we couldn't have saved up for it, and it just happens. And then we have to spend money based on the fact that this thing happened, right? Then we need an emergency fund in order to cover that set of situations, whatever those situations may be. And the coronavirus pandemic created such an emergency for a lot of people. So it showed that the second part of the financial action plan, which is building a month's worth of expenses in an emergency fund, and then subsequently the fifth part of the financial action plan, which is saving up 4 to 6 months worth of household expenses in an emergency fund. Both of those steps are vital, right? They're vital in building a strong financial foundation. Because let's say you lost your job during the pandemic. If you lost your job, then you likely were looking for work after you lost the job, right? You're looking for a new job. Well, if you have 4 to 6 months worth of household expenses in an emergency fund, and let's say you're the primary breadwinner in your household, well, that means you have 4 to 6 months in order to get your life back together, get a new job, right? Readjust to whatever just happened to you. Is it an ideal situation? Absolutely not. But it can allow you to get back on your feet in a proper way. And not to mention, if you have 4 to 6 months of household expenses and something negative happens, well, you're really going to cut down your expenses quite a bit. So that 4 to 6 months might actually last you longer. But the coronavirus pandemic taught us, right? This is a lesson that it's teaching us, is that emergency funds are necessary. Having liquid money that you can get your hands on in an emergency fund is absolutely necessary. And when I say an emergency fund, I don't mean money that you have invested, right? I don't mean money that you have stashed in Bitcoin, right? What I mean is money that is in some high yield savings account or money market account, something that is extremely liquid and that we're not trying to grow outstandingly, right? We're not trying to grow this money. We're not putting this money at risk. This money is insurance against tragedy. It is not an investment. It's not money that we are investing. It is insurance. We put insurance in place to protect our investments, right? Why do you have homeowners insurance? To protect your house. Why do you have car insurance? To protect your car, right? So an emergency fund is protecting your finances, right? It's protecting your financial life. It's protecting your investments, okay? So we have to have that emergency fund in place. And when we have this emergency fund in place, it allows us time to process what's going on around us. It allows us time to rebuild whatever has been broken down. And it allows us to maybe step into a new place that is actually better than the previous place that we were in. Because if you have this emergency fund set up and you lose a job, right, you don't have to just take the absolute first job open, right? You can be a tad more selective. Now, obviously, if a bunch of people are losing their jobs and you actually find one, you don't want to be far too selective, but you can be a bit more selective, and you can actually shop your skills in better markets. You can actually try to make changes in your life that you've always wanted to make and just didn't have the courage to do so. But now, since you have the time and the money in order to make such changes, then it's going to be possible, right? It's possible that you can leverage that emergency fund into a new job, into a career field that you've always wanted to do, into a new small business, into any number of things that can help you out financially and can help you to live your dreams as far as your career and your financial freedom goals. Now, am I saying that it's easy to get a job if you've lost a job? Absolutely not. Am I saying that it's easy to have 4 to 6 months worth of expenses? Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that being intentional enough and following a plan to get to this point can allow you more margin. It can allow you the ability to make decisions that other people cannot make. And I know this is really negative and I don't want to harp on it too much, but a lot of people died this year, right? A lot of people died based on catching COVID, and that was ultimately their demise. And in having such an emergency fund, right? If you have a family member that passes away, right? If your parents pass away, if a child passes away, if your spouse passes away, whoever it may be, right? You have emergency fund money there in order to pay for their final expenses and things of the like. You don't have to worry about having to come up with money because you have already set that money aside, right? This is the importance of an emergency fund. It can create a sense of security even in times of panic, even in times of high emotion and high volatility. You can still, have this security and this calm in order to make the proper decisions, because that's a big thing when it comes to decision making is your emotions, right? If everything's really emotional and seems really urgent and seems like you have no other choices and you have to make, a decision now and you have to do it in order to just live, in order to just get by, and you're very stressed out and you're very anxious, then you're probably not going to make, one, the best decisions, and two, you're probably not going to be able to do the thing that you want to do. Okay, so the emergency fund can really open up a lot of doors for us, and the coronavirus pandemic taught us that an emergency fund is absolutely necessary.